daily Zencast. Hosted by the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's talk Trump.
Welcome back, everybody. It is Wednesday, May 8th, 6:48 Pacific Time, in the glorious, glorious dawn of Act 2 of the great Trumptopia melodrama. For those who may not know yet, the reason I refer to what's going on as the top of Act 2 from a 4-act play is twofold. One, I'm a theater academic. I studied theater my whole life. I practice theater professionally. It's not a glorious or glamorous job, and no, I don't feel like I'm part of some dark, nefarious industry out to destroy the world. Although some accuse it of being part of that bundle. Is it? Question mark? I don't know. A subject for a different segment on another day. Today, Wednesday, May 8th, is a fascinating day. That letter that was signed, I think written and signed by originally 150 some odd former by a handful, I think it was about 150 former federal prosecutors. There we go. I can enunciate if I give myself the chance. That letter, the number of signatures on it has skyrocketed to over 700 in the past 3 days. For those who are not aware, I thought I'd take a visit at... I was trying to find the actual letter. And on the... I typed in former prosecutor's letter, and maybe that's not the best phrasing, but I got a lot of articles about it from the New Yorker, from Slate.com, from the Washington Post, from the LA Times, from townhall.com. I've never heard of them, but they seem to be the one standout link here. Everybody else's headline is sort of featuring or echoing that hundreds of ex-federal prosecutors have joined in signing this letter. This one takes a contrary stance. Oh, look who signed the former prosecutor's letter against Trump. And then in the little sample text that is here, I haven't even clicked through yet. Now arriving at obstruction junction, stand clear and exit to the left. That's the next step in the evolutionary chain for the Russian collusion myth. Which is fascinating. And I love that from the right, from the echo chamber of the right, this has already solidly been judged and packaged and handled as a myth, as a lie, as a delusion. And that it seems to work really well with those already at the sort of center of the base that is unlikely to ever really change their minds about him. But it doesn't really fly with anybody else, which is hilarious. Mostly because these kinds of Russia denial approaches, they're contingent on like wholly fabricated aspects or argument or quote-unquote facts. But I digress. I've already addressed my thoughts on calling the investigation a witch hunt, especially from the double hypocrisy position of being a politician that is not very different from any other politician. I think that's my most controversial statement because it pisses people off on both sides of the pro-Trump, anti-Trump divide. Pro-Trumpers don't want Trump to be just like every other politician, because if he is, then they have to own up to the fact that he got them. Gotcha! You fell for the same old bullshit yet again from a different politician just because he was more like you. And it pisses off people on the anti-Trump side, because if Trump is just another politician like all the other politicians, and he's just pushing the pendulum further than anybody else has in this one direction, then what are all the other politicians up to? And if you concede that Trump is just like all the other politicians, except for the fact that his role, his character, is defined as being over the top and like crazy, psychopathically just beyond the norm, then what does that really say about the quote-unquote everybody else in politics? And nobody on the left wants that, because they want to try to reel things back to some nostalgic place of like, at least the politicians lie to us in a predictable way and we can sort of hold them accountable and we can actually try to get things done. But let's see if we can find this letter. I wanted to find the actual letter. Instead of articles about the letter. I did find the actual New York Times, in other news, article, and I wanted to look at that, about Trump's taxes and his business acumen. Let's see. If we type in a slightly different phrasing, Medium.com seems to be hosting a copy of it, I think. That's what it looks like from this blurb. Medium.com is sort of like a fancier, schmancier Facebook, but it also partners with Facebook for sign-in, so it's probably going to get bought up by Facebook. Oh, I think this might actually be it. So, if I'm wrong, please forgive me. But on Medium.com, on this particular profile, Department of Justice alumni statement, which is being followed by 872 people at this time. Oh, I've got to sign in to follow it. Sorry. I have an account, but I don't remember my password. Okay. I'm not going to blather that on my podcast, right? So there's a lot of hubbub about things like this, and there's always a lot of spin. And what gets to me is and why I wanted to find the actual letter, is in situations like this, you get the echo chamber of echo chamber systems all riled up, right? Like the echo chambers start echo chambering away, and claims are made from one camp, basically in this left-right dichotomy, where everyone else is marginalized to the dismissive nomer of third party, and isn't accounted for, really, even though everybody, if you added all the registered third party Americans and all the Americans that don't vote, that block dwarfs the Republican Party and the Democratic Party combined. And yet the only opinions that really seem to matter and that are really covered in depth are the left, right, and some of the spectrum in the middle. That's a whole other episode of discussion there. But what I find lamentable is that neighbors, otherwise well-intentioned people, Americans, spewing hate at other Americans because they're not Americaning correctly. They don't have the right American ideology. They don't believe in the right set of American ideals. It's like, what? And And the substance of the stuff that they're arguing is often the lies about that which is being lied about instead of the actual thing. This just happened with the Mueller report, right? The Mueller report is completed and submitted. The Trump camp creates lies that they believe they could sort of walk back into, well, I was just summarizing, but are just false. But that themselves inherently are contingent on the notion that the content in the, although they were really subtle, right? Like, I don't want to get sidetracked on this because we have this other letter to look at. But you see what I'm saying? Like, they spun it, and then the left tried to respin it back, but that included their own spin. And then Mueller has mysteriously been publicly quiet, but behind the scenes going, hey, what the fuck? And the people, and here's what gets to me. Here's what makes me just face palm and shake my head at once. Is there a face palm, shake my head combo emoji / acronym? I guess it's just FPSMH. I digress. Is that the people then get to spewing venomous hatred, meaningless argument at each other, not based on the content of the thing being argued over, but the echo chamber's various spin on it. And it's like, you guys are arguing about the wrong things. I'm sorry, but Trump lied about what was in the Mueller report. Barr lied about what's in the Mueller report. And the Democrats have been postulating about what might be in the Mueller report in a very sort of like, haha, that's not what's going to be in the Mueller report. And I'm not calling, let's remember, guys, I don't have a side, but I am of the opinion that in a meta level way, if we're going to analyze this system, the left generally wears the pretendo white hat of we're the good guys, and the right generally wears the pretendo black hat of ha ha ha, we're the bad guys, for the purposes of pitting their bases against each other. So my point is, it's really sad and absurd, annoying, and kind of deeply frustrating to see neighbors, fellow country persons, fellow countrymen and women, hating their brothers and sisters, fellow countrymen and women of this nation. And I'm not going to try to add, silly bells and whistles like this once great nation or blah, blah, blah. This is just a nation. Let's just deal with it where we're at now. Let's not add nonsense nostalgia to some imagined past condition. Most of those mythologies can get ripped to shreds, right? And that's the thing, that the right is using something that is real in a sort of unfair and nefarious way. And that's that America creates mythologies of itself and then passes it off as its own sort of pop culture interpretation of history. But that's a whole nother episode. I'm really tired of seeing people fighting over the made-up spin over a given document, especially when it's a fucking document that you can look up and read. So, here we are, friends, looking up and reading the statement by former federal prosecutors. That's what it's titled on Medium, as posted by the DOJ Alumni Statement Profile on May 6th. It's now Wednesday, May 8th. So apparently had about 150 signatures when it first went up, and now it has over 700. And it reads, and for clarity, and I know I make this disclaimer all the time, I disclaim this as often as I can because I'm sure I'll get accused of this should I ever actually build a large enough audience. But as of this recording, no one is paying me to read the things I read and express the opinions I express. The opinions expressed in this show are wholly those of my crazy mind and the characters that reside within it. All right. But I promise to you, I swear to you, I pinky swear to you, that I'm reading to you what, to the best of my ability, is in fact this letter this open letter to the president and to Congress that has over 700 signatures on it, which, as I understand it, the extreme right is already dismissing as like, well, look at that. It's a lineup of the deep state that really wants to commit a second failed coup. And we're going to have to talk about this whole failed coup nonsense in just a second. But let's stick to this statement. It reads, "We are former federal prosecutors. We served under both Republican and Democratic administrations at different levels of the federal system, as line attorneys, supervisors, special prosecutors, United States attorneys, and senior officials at the Department of Justice. The offices in which we served were small, medium, and large, urban, suburban, and rural, and located in all parts of the country. Each of us believes that the conduct of President Trump, described in Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report, would, in the case of any other person not covered by the Office of Legal Counsel policy against indicting sitting president, result in multiple felony charges for obstruction of justice." The Mueller report describes several acts that satisfy all of the elements for an obstruction charge: conduct that obstructed or attempted to obstruct the truth-finding process, as to which the evidence of corrupt intent and connection to the pending proceedings is overwhelming. These include, bullet point, the president's effort to fire Mueller and to falsify evidence about that effort. Bullet point, the president's effort to limit the scope of Mueller's investigation to exclude his conduct. Bullet point, the president's effort to prevent witnesses from cooperating with investigators probing him and his campaign. Now I want to pause here for a hot second. The counter-argument from the right, from the hardcore blind faith Trump supporters, is that this kind of statement is inherently false. That it's made up. Like somebody I was having an online discussion with said, I had asked him, so have you read, this is back when the Mueller report had just hit, and he was making a bunch of claims. It sounded really wacky to me. I'm like, where are you getting this from? And I asked, like, have you read the actual Mueller report? It's now available. You can get it for free. It's the actual report. It's redacted as fuck, but you can read it. Have you read it? And he sort of made a claim that of course he has, although it sounded sort of like nonsense to me because none of what he had posted in a comment about a post I'd made about the Mueller report seemed to have anything to do with the report itself. It seemed to have stuff to do from the right in defense of Trump in like accusation mode against the evil, nefarious, deep, dark state agents that in Trump's mind have committed treason and in the mind of many supporters, literally need to get strung up by the neck. Now, this is fascinating to me. Now, I get it. Corruption exists. I'm not naively believing that only Trump is bad and that everything else in government is good and right. No. I'm the one reminding everybody that as we live through this cycle of insanity, and it should those who are considering themselves in the opposition camp, in the resistance against Trump, should that side win some sort of victory, we must not forget in those moments after whatever it is that is considered the defeating of Trump, that to return to a status quo of what things were like immediately before Trump is to return to the conditions that gave us Trump. That there is no, just like Trump is trying to make America great again, and that whole idea is kind of nonsense, because the America that philosophical position he seems to occupy apparently is pointing to is sort of like the most blatantly racist era of America in history, and that's what they want to get back to, when white supremacy was so sublimated that it was just default, right? And so sublimated into the extreme of normalcy, that everything in America was whitewashed, and you didn't even think of it as whitewashing. But I digress, right? Like, the resistance, the anti-45 movement, whoever they are comprised of, whatever, those who consider themselves true patriots of America's real democratic republic, that want to go back to some pre-Trumpian sense of normalcy, we cannot blinder ourselves now to the fact that those conditions were already corrupt enough as to make all of this possible. Okay? And that I'm aware of that. But that even in the face of that fact, or that understanding, we still only have the political tools that we've created for ourselves at our disposal in order to handle the situation at hand. Okay? And that the first real wave of grassroots network sort of effort that should be invested in is not some rally to support impeachment, but rather, in my humble opinion, some overwhelming unifying in order to heal the artificial and manipulated or manipulative engineered political division and conflict that is inherent in the way the system operates. And we can't do that by fighting with each other over who to vote for. That's not how healing works. Okay, so sorry, that's a tangent to connect over to the Almost Daily Zencast segments, where I talk things through from a much more esoteric spiritual side. So coming back to the pragmatic, one of the first things we can do in sort of simple practical terms is deal with the actual logistical facts of the matter in regards to how the rule of law functions in this country, as corrupt as it is, as messed up as it might be, and shine a light on what is and what is not verifiable fact in the face of the legal system and its limitations and flaws. So that statements like complete and total exoneration can't take up space in people's minds if it is easily confirmed that that's 100% not true. And that wasn't, right? When Barr and Trump both claimed exoneration, they were claiming that the content of the Mueller report exonerated him. The content of the Mueller report, if you read it, explicitly said, we cannot exonerate this individual. We also cannot bring any legal charges against him. That's not exoneration, folks. So we need to work at that level. Us, you and I. The people that, people are calling apples bananas and bananas grapefruit. And we're like, whoa, we know what an apple is. We know what a banana is. We know what a grapefruit is. Stop pretending that they're all the same, right? They're not. So back to this letter. This is getting retaliated against and being used as like, this letter is covert treason. The people behind this movement to hold President Trump accountable for his criminal actions, they are being cast as treasonous, immoral, malicious, dark state, deep state actors that need to be strung up. And now, like I said, there's a really funny and weird coincidence to that sort of claim, which I want to get to in a minute. But let's continue with our overview of this letter before things spiral out of control here. The next section of the letter is titled Attempts to Limit the Mueller Investigation. And it opens with the sentence, the report describes multiple efforts by the president to curtail the scope of the special counsel's investigation. Okay. Now, like I was talking about in a recent episode, we can assume that the Mueller report is corrupt, right? Great. Okay, the Mueller report is corrupt and doesn't accurately represent the truth. Why are they still lying about it? Because, they're still lying about it. Perhaps, my friends, the Mueller report isn't absolute fabrication. Maybe it isn't a complete and total crazy witch hunt. Maybe there are some biased players. Maybe there were some people who said some over-the-top things against him, as if Trump hasn't made a daily ritual of saying over-the-top crazy things about his opponents or his people he doesn't like, people who are viewed as his enemies, right? But we're trying to hold our political system accountable to, the supposedly most important level or standard, which is defend the Constitution. Is investigating a president an attack on the Constitution? If that president were true and righteous and virtuous in very legitimate way, perhaps it could be. Is President Trump true and righteous in a very real and legitimate way? That's laughable, friends. Laughable. And the problem is his support base, our brothers and sisters in humanity, our fellow Americans, have been brainwashed into a special sort of cult of personality, irrational, emotion-based, narcissism, ego-based echo chamber of blind faith, admiration, and love for this particular human being known as Trump. And we can't fight our way into changing their minds, but we can, I think, help them to see him clearly through efforts of healing and support and a sort of non-combative questioning and review of the facts. Let's stop calling them names. That's not doing anybody good. If you want to change the world, start giving some compassion and forgiveness and healing love towards the Trump base, and then maintain a patient approach of sticking to the facts and not letting their tactics get under your skin, because they're thriving on division, right? They think they're winning because they can piss people off and get them to bluster and fail at their composed attempt at a legal or rather a sane logical argument about legal proceedings, about these legal events going on in our current moment in Trumptopian history. So I can get into the details of this longer, more deeper section, but they break it down into the president pressured the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. He was warned by McGahn that he couldn't behave in certain ways. And the report, they say, explains that substantial evidence indicates that the president's effort to have Sessions limit the scope of the special counsel's investigation to the future investigation into future election interference was intended to prevent further investigative scrutiny of the president and his campaign conduct They go on to have a section about witness tampering and intimidation. The president tried to influence the decisions of both Michael Cohen and Paul Manafort with regard to cooperating with investigators. The letter goes on to say that as former federal prosecutors, we recognize that prosecuting obstruction of justice case is critical because unchecked obstruction, which allows intentional interference with criminal investigations to go unpunished, puts our whole system of justice at risk. Now, asterisk. I'm not a huge fan of the way in which our system of justice operates. It is biased against brown and yellow and black-skinned people. But it is still attempting to be a system of justice. And as I constantly try to remind my friends, both in real life and you, my dear listeners, no human institution is absolutely one thing or another. Absolutist thinking is ego trap thinking. So, if we're going to hold our government accountable, we can't approach it with absolutist thinking because our government does not operate in absolutist ways. It's a big fucking clusterfuck of everything. Good, bad, ugly, boring, in between, corrupt, not corrupt. There's a little bit of everything going on. And if you try to approach the problem solving needed in order to truly improve every American's quality of life, you cannot approach this massive clusterfuck of many different problems with absolutist thinking. You will blind yourself to too many details of the problem, and you will limit your capacity to comprehend what's actually going on, which will render your solutions kind of useless, in my personal opinion. And I think the evidence for that argument, in favor of my argument there, is in fact people like Donald Trump and his base. They view the world with absolutist thinking. Only I can fix this. He's not fixing jack shit, you guys, but he has sold the absolutist thinking to his base that he and he alone can solve the problems, whether he's really identified them or understood them at all, that his base is contending with, fears, and wants solved. But what has he solved? I'm not seeing a lot of great solutions. And to be fair, I'll have to go back to Trump Tracker soon and look at the promises section that are like fulfilled, because there is a section there. It's like, oh, he kept these promises. And we'll do that in a future episode. But from a standing here in my life perspective, looking around to the best of my ability to look into and verify claims being made by people on all sides, not a lot of solution making has happened. All right? And in fact, a lot of my personal, I don't want to say predictions, because I didn't make declarative statements like we're going to go to war with Iran, but some of the things that I tried to say we might, should, could, would look out for seem to be bearing out, right? I didn't make predictions, but I definitely said, like, this guy's just another puppet for the war profiteers, so guess what? In the long run, somehow or another, no matter how much he's criticized past presidents for war, we're going to find ourselves in some new war. Because notice, he's criticized past presidents for war, and then during the election he turned around and said, quote, I love war, even with nukes. Love war. That's a very almost accurate quote. I kind of butchered the middle of it, I think. But he did say that he favors war. Okay? After spending many years criticizing presidents when it was convenient for him to criticize them regarding war. As one of my very first memes, and one of the few that I still like need to share, like this has to be seen over and over again before people get it. It's like he, as a con man, played the role of, I'm the only guy that's going to stand up to the nefarious, evil bad guys. Insert your favorite name here. Right? Like, so his Trump supporters are like, he's the only one who can stand up to the New World Order. Like, Batman's like, bitch, please. He is the New World Order. He's the only one who can expose all the puppets. He is a puppet. Now, friends, let's put some pins here. For those of you who are not familiar with my show, when I call someone a puppet, and I think humbly most of us are, even I am a bit puppety at times, I don't necessarily mean it inherently, absolutely, as like some sort of evil, nefarious, Illuminati control thing. What I mean to say is that we often are not in charge of what we pretend to think we are in our own real lives. And that goes to the subject of free will versus predeterminism. Like, are things predetermined and everything's just sort of being hammered out in that predeterministic way, or are we picking and choosing and making real choices? It's a false dichotomy, and that goes to the heart of my entire cosmology. And I'll put it to you as simply as I can. Duality and non-duality have always coexisted simultaneously at all times. The notion that they are mutually exclusive is an incorrect notion, but we cling to it and therefore perceive an exclusivity or a mutually exclusive presentation of duality, non-duality, apparently being unable to occupy the same existence, but they do. It's necessary for the way the universe unfolds, and that applies metaphorically and maybe also metaphysically to how politics works. But I'm going to wrap things up here because I'm making a big effort to keep these episodes shorter, right? So they close this letter. We emphasize that these are not matters for close professional judgment. Let me read that again. We emphasize that these are not matters of close professional judgment. Of course, there are potential defenses or arguments that could be raised in response to an indictment of the nature we describe here. In our system, every accused person is presumed innocent, and it is always the government's burden to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. But to look at these facts and say that a prosecutor could not probably sustain a conviction for obstruction of justice, the standard set out in Principles of Federal Prosecution, runs counter to logic and our experience. As former federal prosecutors, we recognize that prosecuting obstruction of justice cases is critical because unchecked obstruction, which allows, I already read this, haven't I? Unintentional interference with the criminal investigation to go unpunished puts our whole system of justice at risk. We believe strongly that, but for the OLC memo, the overwhelming weight of professional judgment would come down in favor of prosecution for the conduct outlined in the Mueller report. So apparently, as of the last time I checked the news, over 700 former prosecutors have signed on to that letter, which I just gave a cursory read to. No offense meant, no rights impingement intended. I think that this is a matter of public discourse, and that the public should have all, free and unencumbered access to this sort of stuff. So, the biggest issue, in my humble opinion, isn't whether or not the Mueller report is legitimate or whether or not Trump committed collusion or obstruction. The biggest issue is whether or not American citizens who are caught up in ideological echo chambers that cause nonsensical ideological divides can come to their senses and realize that they are being manipulated and pitted against each other for a cause primarily of profiteering. They profiteer on the conflict they create at every level and in every possible way. And distraction from the real solutions that are available to the problems that we created for ourselves by keeping us busy fighting over Monica Lewinsky and whether or not they had sexual congress and the dress and the splooge on the dress, by keeping us busy arguing about whether or not Donald Trump officially plotted with Putin, or whether or not it just sort of was convenient that Russia was going to meddle this time around anyways, and he let it happen. It doesn't matter whether or not those FBI agents that exchanged opinionated text messages about Trump, it doesn't matter whether or not those texts should have or should not have been sent. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. I don't think they committed treason. I think treason has to go a little bit further than an ineffectual investigation that leaves the potential criminal in office, right? So that's to come back to that claim and to the counter argument to these sorts of things, right? Cool, thank you, computer. Although that entry is incorrect. That schedule has changed. Anyways, the counter argument to any kind of discussion or analysis of the evidence that was rendered by the Mueller report currently seems to be that the people responsible for initiating the investigation were committing treason by investigating potential criminal acts. And I don't think that, and those people who were really attached to that argument are convinced that some great massive change is about to hit the world. And I think they're being trolled pretty hard, and I think they're being prompted to prepare for something that's not going to happen, so they're preparing for a totally wrong thing. But we're going to have to leave it there and come back to those topics in another episode. Other things I want to come back to in future episodes is this whole tax situation and how they're trying to dismiss it as inaccurate, and how it only sort of confirms the appropriateness of requesting presidential candidates to submit their tax returns, and the absurdity of Trump's continued denial of that transparency, while also calling himself the most transparent president ever. But we'll leave that for a future episode. As always, my friends, thank you for tuning in.
And that is the latest madness from behind the orange wall. Thank you for listening to GMT, a special segment of the Almost Daily Zencast. Stay woke, Trumptopia. Stay woke.
Oh yeah, I wanted to add really quickly a quick thought. Instead of fighting over whether or not Trump is a good guy or a bad guy, just in case my argument isn't obvious, here's my ultimate challenge. The incorrigible Mr. Zeppo's political challenge is, instead of arguing over Trump, whether he's a good guy or a bad guy, can we all, regardless of political ideology, regardless of spiritual or religious model, can we just focus on healing the motherfucker? Like getting him to face his own problems, getting him to hold himself accountable, getting him to wake up from the disease that he's entrenched in. Is that crazy sounding? Is that too much to ask?